let's roll right into the hottest topic in Major League Baseball, which is the Houston Astros. This team, you know all the offseason talk with the buzzers, the trash cans. Players are now reporting and talking about how it's had a direct effect on their season. We're going to find, I'm sure more and more will leak out about this team. And, the general consensus is how is this going to affect some of the offensive players that are on their team? So let's go ahead and break it down. In 2019, their projected win total was 96.5. They finished with 107. Now, their Pathag wins last year was 107. And if you're not familiar with Pathag, it's a way of, if you're familiar with our college football or NFL, we have second order win total, which is kind of a cousin to Pythagorean, which says your runs scored versus your runs against. Did you actually earn the record that you have? So with the Houston Astros, they won 107. Pathag says they should have won 107. So they were on par with that. But their current total right now at Westgate is 94.5. Sean, you got them projected at 94 wins. Do you see anything up or down about this team? All the things that are happening off the field, all the things that they're returning on the field. Do you have anything, about the 94.5 win total that they're currently at Westgate?
So I have Houston projected at 94 wins. I've been there since, I first put out my projections for this year. They had already lost Cole by that point. They haven't done anything to necessarily upgrade their roster. Also lost Wade Miley, lost Will Harris, who was their most trusted reliever in the postseason. So they've kind of taken a clustered loss in their pitching department, especially when you add in the fact that they lost Charlie Morton last year, losing 2 top 15 starters in baseball, potentially the best starter in baseball, and Garrett Cole really takes a big hit out of them. You never mind the fact that in the playoffs, they really seem to be struggling for who is going to start after Greinke in a potential playoff series. So now you're 1 starter shy. You have a couple of 37-year-old starters coming into the season with Greinke and Verlander. You have a manager who tends to overwork his pitchers, and Dusty Baker. Their lineup without a single pitcher on their current roster, if you just gave them a bunch of free agent pitchers, they're still an 82-win team. They have the highest projected WAR amongst any offensive group of players in baseball. They're also a strong defensive unit. But that just shows you, it speaks to the quality of position players on this Astros team. Jordan Alvarez is potentially a Hall of Fame hitter. I mean, he's another David Ortiz to me. His WRC plus last year was 178. If you had given him a full season of at-bats with that, he would have been the only hitter ranked behind Mike Trout. Kristen Yelich was at 174. Trout was at 180. So it speaks to his quality. They're just an extremely deep offense. They play defense well. And, the only concern is just about them taking a step back in terms of their starting pitching. They've had plenty of cluster injuries to that staff in recent years. Lance McCullers, hasn't really pitched more than 120 innings. He missed most of last year. So rotation depth is a big concern for them, patched together those last 3 spots in the rotation. And, they don't necessarily impress you in the corner outfield as much as you think an elite team like them would. But other than that, they're still an elite team. And I think people tending to fade them all the way down to 94 wins, I'm starting to lean towards the over, even though I'm right there.
Right. Do you take any effect with Dusty Baker becoming the manager? I mean, he's great for the clubhouse. He's great for the players, but the reputation is he's going to run the arm off of any of your pitchers. And that goes back to the Mark Pryor, Kerry Wood years. And if you look at it, the number of times he's had a pitcher where he's managed a team and they've gone over 120 pitches, especially in the last couple of years with the Nats, it had gone down tremendously over the beginning of his career, say when he was with the Cubs. But at the same time, he had Max Scherzer on his staff, who I don't know if he could pull him off the mound. Max is going to be on the mound if he wants to. But yeah, I think there's some other things with Dusty Baker you got to take into account if you're looking at futures with the Astros. Dusty Baker's only won 3 of 12 postseason series he's ever managed. And what's funny is, if you saw when he got the job here with the Astros, he claims that he follows analytics now, that he's a sabermetrics guy, that he's somebody that pays attention to things that are going on with his pitchers. And it just kind of reminds me of Mike McCarthy getting the Cowboys job, saying all of a sudden he pays attention to stats and it's going to have an effect on how he manages and coaches a team. Do you think it is a positive or a negative for Dusty Baker during the regular season and in the postseason as a manager?
I mean, I think Hinch was one of the better managers in baseball, was at least respected in the regard that he was. So the sudden changeover of losing him, losing your general manager, losing the assistant GM who were out there using analytics to hunt for pitchers who had spin rates that they thought that they could manipulate. for different reasons. I think that's in general is a hit, but there's nothing that you can quantify in terms of, reducing their projected win total as a result of that, because you expect them to acquire lesser players in season or something like that. You have to project them based off of what they are now. My only, remark on Baker is that if he was given this job so quickly and seemed to be the front runner for it, the Astros, which is where Houston's new GM James Click came from, or sorry, I should say the Rays and the Astros are two of the better teams in baseball at kind of keeping a communication pipeline from the ownership to the GM down to the manager, and all having one vision. So I'm sure it's been communicated, throughout these interviews with Baker about their plan with regards to managing their staff, the fact that they have two older starting pitchers who are Hall of Famers, but getting up there in years. And, the Astros and the Rays specifically deploy their pitchers a little bit differently, especially the back end of their rotation than other teams do. They will utilize openers and bring in middle relievers earlier than they need to. So I think he has the resources and the infrastructure around him to manage the staff without getting anybody injured. But, it's his history. It's remembering how good Mark Pryor was and seeing how quickly that deteriorated was, it still frustrates me, because Pryor could have been a great one. So, I'm sure something Dusty thinks about constantly too and gets reminded about. So maybe he has changed over the years.
Well, I definitely probably won't be seeing McCullers throw 120 pitches anytime early this season. As far as the lineup goes offensively, if Josh Reddick happens to have an injury, there's a pretty good fill-in that the Astros have, correct?
Yeah, Kyle Tucker, former number 5 overall pick. He had a 30-30 year in the minors last year. He was 20-20 the year before. I think even if Reddick does what he's been doing, Tucker has a chance to take playing time away from him. He's, another potential star in that lineup, as if they need more. But they gladly traded away Derek Fisher, who had been kind of in that Tucker role the past few years. They traded him away to Houston or to Toronto. So now Tucker's in the driver's seat for more playing time. And, he's one of my sleepers for fantasy this year. I mean, he's not much of a sleeper because he's so well regarded and has such a high pedigree, but I certainly think he's worth drafting and stashing under bench in the event that he does get more playing time, because he has the potential to be a contributor across all 5 categories.
Yeah, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, Kyle Tucker's somebody you're going to want to grab in a dynasty league if he's not already taken. In a keeper league, you're going to want to have him in a late round 1-year league. This is somebody that you're going to want to have, even if it's just 400 plate appearances. From a pitching perspective, Jose Urquidy, his first 2 starts against the Rangers and Cardinals, he went 13 innings pitched, had 2 earned runs and 15 Ks. There was, a little bit of regression after that, after, most of the gamblers had jumped on him and rode him for numerous starts after he came up. How do we see his development for 2020?
So I'm actually a fan of Urquidy. I really like his changeup. He looked really good in the playoffs coming out of the bullpen. It was very effective, leaving, I want to say game 4 against Washington. But he's somebody who projects well by PECOTA. He has good command. I think his skills should translate well to the major league level. It's just a question of durability. He's not the biggest guy, so it's like I said, it's going to kind of be a patchwork thing with the bottom of this Astros rotation between McCullers, Urquidy, maybe Josh James getting in there, Framber Valdez. So how they allocate those innings will be really interesting to me. But I think of all of them, Urquidy has by far the most upside.
Yeah, I agree. So Urquidy and Tucker from a fantasy perspective, and I think you got to keep your eyes on Bregman and Altuve. They're actually dropped in in their ADP and their value as far as some of these fantasy drafts are concerned. I don't think that there's going to be that big of a difference in what they've done in the regular season and the playoffs versus what they're going to do this season. So maybe look for some value if some Astro players are dropping in your drafts.